I'm super excited to introduce Micki Seibel, someone I knew a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, in a role very different from where she ended up, and in a way that I think is very admirable and amazing. And as Micki may not know, but we'll share, is Santa Cruz has a long history in agriculture, particularly in sort of modern organics. And when I found out that Micki had gotten into ag tech, I'm like, oh my goodness, that's so cool. And then when this class happened, I thought, you know what? Innovation in agriculture, I think, is such a good fit for Santa Cruz. And so I'm super, super happy that Micki felt she had time in her busy schedule to come give us a chat. So, and let me make sure we're recording. Turn this on.
It looked like we were.
Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, we're good. So the other thing I want to say is that I was reviewing a lot of the questions today. I think they're really great. You guys are getting better at thinking about things and doing your research. It's really, really nicely done there. And maybe, Nana, you can see more of the class, so maybe you could kick off to see who wants to get started. Or
Okay.
shall we actually, let's have, Micki, give yourself like a 2-minute TLDR. Highlights in the career.
2-minute TLDR. I think I'm too old for 2 minutes, but I'll try.
Okay, how about 5?
I think I can do it in 2. Studied computer science at Carnegie Mellon back in the day, but knew I didn't want to be a software engineer because I find that incredibly boring, sitting in front of a computer for hours on end trying to craft an elegant line of code. Started my role in industry very quickly moving into product management, which is the form of life that Tara knew me in. Started at Intel back in the day, at the beginning of the commercialization of the internet. Worked with Tara at Netscape, where I was a product manager on the browser. From Netscape, went to eBay, where I was the first head of product there. The company was growing at a massive scale, like unfathomable how fast we were growing in the 3.5 years that I was there. Then was part of a management team that turned around an English language search engine called Ask Jeeves back in the day, but it was a good opportunity to take a failing business that was running out of money and figure out how to make value for the shareholders so that they didn't lose money, and actually make a profitable business that was acquired by another company called Interactive Corp. And that's when I decided I wanted to be more entrepreneurial and be on the ground floor of startup companies so that I wasn't just fixing problems created by founding management teams later in a company's life. I could create those problems for future management teams by doing it right in the beginning. Did 5 startup companies in total, always coming in as part of the founding team. And then about several years ago now, decided I wanted to make a shift into food and agriculture because to me it was the industry that offered the greatest hope of mitigating climate change, and that's as an outsider looking in, and I wanted to learn more about it. And so I've spent the last 10 years of my career as both a founder of an ag tech startup called Unfold Bio and mostly on the venture capital side investing in future big ag tech companies.
All right. I know one of the questions, very well done, thank you. One of you all, if you could tell me who and ask the question where it was about why Micki got into ag tech.
I did, but it was not long ago.
That's okay.
I don't know if you haven't seen that or someone else did it.
That's okay. Go ahead and ask your question.
I was wondering maybe if it was something kind of along your childhood or growing up that made you, one, I guess, care so much for people that you wanted to get into something that was along these lines, and then 2, kind of with that care for people, what tailored it towards farming and sustainability and stuff like that?
It was more that I was a technologist at heart, and that's what I spent most of my career doing. And at the time that the internet was being commercialized, there were all these positive impacts that the tech industry was having on the world. And I wanted to take that into a realm that was more dear to my heart, which was actually the environment. And I would say when it comes to saving people or saving planet, I'm all about saving the planet, not so much about the people. And as I said, looking at food, the whole agricultural value chain and food production, it seemed to me like there's an opportunity to really mitigate climate change. And to me, climate change looks like the greatest entrepreneurial opportunity that ever faced mankind. If you look at how the Industrial Revolution massively changed the way we organize labor, the way we organize government, the road, the rail, the shipping, the supply chains that we put into place, manufacturing lines, and we lifted 1 billion people or more out of poverty. There are lots of collateral damage to that kind of system, but again, we're facing a climate crisis, and I think we have the opportunity to make those revolutionary changes again. And so I wanted to be a part of that. And food and agriculture look like natural systems, biology. How do we do this differently and better so that we can repair any environmental damage that food production may have caused and possibly reverse it even when it was caused by other industries? So that was my naive view going in, wanting to learn about food and ag.
Desiree, you also asked a question that was similar. It's the same question but from a different angle. Would you mind giving it to us? Desiree, you're on Zoom? Okay. I'm going to ask it for you. What inspired you to transition from product management in many major tech companies to specializing in ag tech? It's the same question, but in a different way. You're coming at it from, I guess, more of a very big change in your career, right?
Yeah, it was a huge change. And to just jump into food and ag, I did it by way of the French telecom Orange has an innovation office in San Francisco, and I proposed that food looks like, of all industries, agriculture is the least digitized. Digitizing things is my wheelhouse. Food as a supply chain is the least digitized supply chain on the planet, and that should be of interest to a multinational telecom. They're basically the AT&T of Europe and Africa. And they said, yeah, we agree. So it allowed me 1.5 years of being paid to learn about the food system and just be an objective observer and put all the skills that I learned in tech product management of how to study a problem and define a problem and understand and bring empathy to the end user and the customer, just put that hat on, start at the beginning of that supply chain and start on the farm and do this massive ethnographic immersion in agriculture. I think in total, in that period, I probably visited about 35 different farms, all in California, because we grow 450 different agricultural commodities. And so it was a really good learning lab for how agriculture is done in other parts of the world. So I could follow those commodities through the supply chain and just learn how those businesses worked, what were the problems, and what opportunities did I see where hardware and software technologies could make things either more efficient or better or ideally more sustainable.
And did I hear you right? You took a year.
1.5 years.
A year and a half to do what you might call customer discovery? Or?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. How different was it?
Can I ask a follow-on question to that?
Of course, Tara.
What about that transformation made it so interesting to Orange, do you think?
Some of a telecom like Orange has a multi-billion euro business unit that is around what they call Orange Business Services, and some of the largest food companies on the planet are customers of Orange. Companies like Nestle, Unilever, some European companies that you probably don't know, like Bonduelle, which is one of the largest fresh produce processors in the EU. And so they were interested in what were the kinds of hardware and software technologies that they could help and sell to their customers that were very specific to the food and ag industry, because their needs were often very different than other industries.
So it was really about expansion of addressable market, so to speak.
Yes.
It wasn't an area that maybe they had considered outside.
Yep.
That is a very important identification. Wow.
Very, very smart move, I think. Kalyanram asks, how different was it from what you expected? Your expectations going into that year and a half?
It was so different because I would say I went in as an educated consumer with strong opinions and strongly held about things like GMOs and how unsustainable our current food production system is, and wanting to regenerative agriculture and small farms and helping your local farmer, and all of that is well and good, but I think the realities of how the industry works, it's actually the efficiencies that we have, the fact that we can feed 7 billion people growing toward 10 billion people by mid-century, we actually can produce enough kilocalories to feed every person on the planet. The problem is not that we don't grow enough food, it's that in our current food system, we may not grow the right kilocalories, and we have a distribution problem because we in the US often have access to way more food than we need, and we waste 40% of it while some parts of the planet go starving, but that's not a production problem, that's actually a distribution problem. So that was kind of eye-opening. I had the opportunity, just 2 weeks ago, I was in Amsterdam, and I went down to Rotterdam for the day to visit a processing facility that's run by Arthur Daniels Midland ADM, one of the largest middle of the supply chain companies on the planet. They buy so much soy. We were just looking at soybeans. They have a facility in Rotterdam that processes 60,000 tons of soybeans every week. Every week. Imagine the largest shipping container ship that you've ever seen on the water, if you've ever seen one in person. They're like floating cities. And the entire hull of this ship was filled with soybeans. And so we watched the soybeans get unloaded and go through 3 different manufacturing lines to extract oil and flake the beans and make meal, and what they're making out of this are the edamame that you eat, the soy meal that goes into animal feed, the oil that comes out of it that goes into lots of different food ingredients. It was just like the scale that they're operating on a weekly basis. And those soybeans had come on that ship from Australia, from Australia to the Netherlands. And that's actually a great efficiency. And it doesn't look like it on the surface, and that's one of the things that I think was very eye-opening for me as an outsider looking in, was that to grow soybeans in Australia, because they have the right soil type, they have a good climate for it, they have very efficient, very technologically advanced farms, they can produce a massive amount of scale, and it's actually most efficient to move those to this processing facility in Rotterdam because the carbon footprint of the transportation is negligible.
Via ship.
By a ship, yeah.
As opposed to planes.
As opposed to building that, or flying it, would be super expensive and a horrible carbon footprint. And as opposed to building those same facilities where they don't exist and having to build one in Australia just to process locally, because then you would have to transport all of those soybeans by truck, which is actually less efficient.
Oh yeah, I'd imagine. Coming from the Midwest, I would assume the U.S. produces a lot of soybean.
We do produce a lot of soybean, and now because of tariffs, we have an excess of soybeans. We can't sell them. Different problem.
Different.
Yeah, it's not a perfect
That's a
system. I didn't say it was a
government-
perfect system. I was just surprised that there were aspects of the system that work so incredibly well.
Yeah. Tara, do you have anything? Oh, you're on mute.
I actually had a question, if I go. I wanted to ask, how do you decide which food startups are worth investing in, and what separates kind of like a genuinely transformative idea just from good marketing?
I think there's a different question in the middle there, which is what is also a genuinely good business that's worth investing in, because something that is genuinely transformational might not actually make good business. And the way that transformation should come to life may not be through making a business around it. What separates a good investable business from just the marketing, roughly the way a venture capitalist would analyze a business, you're looking at 4 things. And you're trying to decide if you are willing to underwrite the risk around these 4 things. First and foremost is the team. And one of the things that we see a lot in ag tech are teams that may know a lot about the tech side. They know nothing about agriculture and its value chain and the industry and how it works and any of the nuance that's there. So you're looking for a great team that have the right domain knowledge and know how to build a business, even if they haven't done it before. The right market, which I would actually classify more specifically as they're solving the right problem. There are plenty of, every startup pitch you see starts with, hey, here's this very large total available market, and that's why we can build a big business in this space. But that's not enough, because you really have to be solving the right problem that a customer is actually willing to pay to solve. And you see a lot of pitches that they might be solving the right problem, but at the end of the day, the customer's just not willing to pay for it. And so there have been a lot of failed businesses, especially around ag tech, where they're solving the right problem, but a farmer's just not willing or capable of paying for it. So you're de-risking market, team, of course the tech, the team need venture capital, you're investing in early stage innovation, so there's a lot of technical risk. And so can the tech actually be built? Is it snake oil? And if necessary, you bring in other experts who can really kick the tires on the technology and the team's ability to build that technology.
Okay, so let me make sure I got them all. You got the team,
Team,
you've got the
market, and tech.
customer, market, and tech. Great question, Isabella. Thank you.
I have a follow-on on that, I think. So, one of the things that you got into is vertical farming. You mentioned restorative agriculture. There's some great documentaries about that. Given sort of the complexities of agriculture, do you feel that the right solutions are always going to be heavily multifaceted? Like there's always going to be a need for a lot of variety in agriculture, and therefore a need for a lot of variety in the technologies for the variety of agricultural types? Or do you think that we're going to start to go in a more singular direction based on your experience?
We'll never go in a singular direction. I mean, the one thing that every person on the planet has in common is that we all need to eat. And to feed as many people as we are, in as many places as we are, with as many variations of plants and animals and fungi and that we can eat, there is never going to be like one solution. It's always going to be a value chain that has lots of multiple different types of solutions. And so something like vertical farming, which looked very promising and got a lot of headlines up to a few years ago, because you have the opportunity to grow food in a very small footprint, because rather than growing 10 acres of lettuce, I can grow 10 stacks of lettuce on 1 acre, and that's so much more land efficient. And it's so much more water efficient, because you can recirculate the water, and when you're treating, lots of purported advantages to it.
Less insecticides, less pests.
You're in a super clean room environment. I mean, they manufacture silicon chips in clean rooms, and these vertical farms are as clean, and the people that go in them are in those same, bunny suits. So yeah, less chemicals. The problem is, and as we see this with AI data centers, the energy consumption is so enormous that it makes the economics upside down. So where vertical farming got all of these headlines for being a way that you could put farms near, and I wrote a lot about this because I was hopeful that this could be a solution, but as it turns out, the economics didn't work out. But where you could put those kind of vertical farms closer to the urban center where population lives. So you could grow a lot of your leafy greens and berries and some of your fresh fruits and vegetables only a few miles from where people are buying them. But the reality is the energy cost is so enormous that it's actually more efficient to grow them down in Salinas and ship them to New York than it is to grow them in New York and ship them to the consumer.
Wow. And I'm
That's sort of
assuming,
a heartbreaking conclusion.
yeah, well,
But that doesn't mean that vertical farming doesn't have its place, because those same
Okay.
technologies can take, where I think it actually plays the best role is in the germination of those seeds. Because if you have driven south anyways and seen some of the fields in Salinas, when they grow something like broccoli or cauliflower or lettuce, they're not planting them as seeds in the field. They've grown them in a greenhouse and they transplant them to the field, but those greenhouses are up in Shasta for lots of different reasons, one of them being the climate, and they're transported down. But with a small vertical farm footprint, you could be germinating those seeds to the transplant radicle that you then put in the field, and you would reduce the amount of loss that would happen. So rather than 50% of those transplants failing, you could get to something more like 90% of those transplants are successful.
no.
So it has its place in the value chain, which is why, end to end, there's always going to be multiple solutions.
I'm assuming you've been to Driscoll's,
Many.
because they're claiming they have one of the largest vertical farms. Have you seen it?
I have.
And how is it?
I don't think you need a vertical farm to grow berries. That vertical farm is actually declared bankruptcy for the same reason, which is the energy consumption is just enormous. But in the Netherlands, this tiny little country that, I swear to God, is about the size of Santa Cruz to San Francisco from end to end. It's a tiny country. They're the second largest agricultural exporter on the planet because almost all of their farming sector is done through greenhouses. So it's not a vertical farm. They're still using ambient light and external climate conditions, but they've gotten super energy efficient. And they grow strawberries, blackberries, raspberries in greenhouses and sell them all across the EU. And I'll tell you, I know Driscoll's is California company, but the berries that I eat in the Netherlands are much tastier than the ones that I buy here that are grown outdoors.
Oh, because why?
They're efficient. They use less pesticides because in a greenhouse you're still somewhat contained, and they're a lot more focused on the outcome for the consumer and creating the taste, the flavor, the texture, and their ability to harvest and then have them in the hands of the consumer is a few days. Where if you're buying Driscoll's berries and you're on the East Coast, they've been 9 days in the supply chain to get there. And I don't know if you've bought strawberries and then looked at them 9 days later.
They're a little mushy.
They're not the best.
Tara, do you have should we hit up the kids?
So let's keep going with student questions.
Okay. This is something I think you've already answered, but let's ask it in a different way. What are the biggest barriers preventing ag tech innovations from scaling in real-world farming environments?
I think there's two parts to scaling innovations on that question. The first one is that there's the market problem. You've got to find a market that's large enough for your innovation to scale, to get economies of scale. And the problem with agriculture and why it's hard to get those ag tech innovations into the field is that it's a highly, highly, highly fragmented market. It's not like making a consumer application that I can sell to everybody everywhere in the world, right? It's segmented by what crop a farm is growing. So if you're trying to create an innovation for somebody growing soybeans, that innovation has almost zero applicability to somebody growing strawberries in Salinas. Like they're practically different industries. That's the fresh produce industry. That's the commodity grain industry, completely different value chains. They don't sell to the same customers from the farm gate. Like everything is different about it. But even if you're growing the same crop, you're fragmented again by farm size. There are small farms, there are large farms. They don't buy from the same people, they don't sell to the same people. And then fragmented again by the climate. If you're growing soybeans in Brazil, that's a tropical climate. If you're growing soybeans in Iowa, that's not a tropical climate. So that high fragmentation makes it really hard to get adoption across crop types, farm sizes, and geographies. So we don't make unicorn, do you guys know that word, unicorn companies? There aren't unicorn companies that are made in ag tech because of that high fragmentation.
I want to thank David Asabir. Is David here? Yeah.
I have a question.
Okay.
I don't really know how to phrase it. When you were getting like your start, what did you like envision your job to be? Because if you found yourself and you wanted to be in the market that you were, did you imagine yourself doing the work that you were doing? And also, what was your favorite project that you worked on?
Do you mean when I started in ag tech or when I started my career back in the day?
In ag tech specifically.
In ag tech. I didn't know what my job would be in ag tech. That's why I wanted to learn more about the industry and understand what were the problems. I think initially I thought maybe I would found a company and wanted to find the right problem to solve in the space, but was keeping an open mind because I could have just as easily landed in some big corporate job. But when that comes out of my mouth, now I laugh because no, I wouldn't, because that's not the environment I like working in. That's why I do what I do now. So I didn't really know what that job would be, and over that 18-month learning period, I realized where I wanted to be and where I could be most effective was on the venture capital side, because then I could have multiple chess pieces on that board by investing in a portfolio of companies. My favorite project that I ever worked on, one of the first problems that I saw in ag tech was lack of connectivity. I mean, as soon as you get out of urban areas, and if you drive up Interstate 5 or Highway 99, which are the primary highways up and down the Central Valley, or you get out in the woods and the redwoods, like there's no cell service. And so when you're talking about being out on a farm, a lot of the farmland, there's no connectivity. And one of the things that I learned in Orange is that there's actually not an economical way to get connectivity if you're thinking about doing it by stringing cell towers and just build more cell towers, because those companies are never going to make their money back. So lack of connectivity was a huge problem. And from working in a telecom, I recognized that needs to be solved from space. It can't be solved from the ground. And at the same time, companies like Facebook were doing high altitude balloons. Somebody's like, oh, we'll just fly drones over all this. Like,
Google was doing that too.
Google was doing that. Yeah, Google had something else that was like, oh my God, are you kidding me? None of that was going to work. So my first job in venture capital, that was one of the first problems that we were setting out to invest in, is how do we solve this global connectivity problem? And we had these two founders, one Sarah Spangolo, whose superpower is aerospace engineering, spent 10 years at the Jet Propulsion Labs, and her co-founder Ben, whose superpower was the miniaturization of electronics and had spent 10 years at Apple working on things like the iPhone and making electronics smaller and smaller. And they built a prototype of a satellite that, no kidding, is like the size of a large grilled cheese sandwich. I could just about wrap my fingers around the outside edge of this satellite. Do you know how cheap that satellite? Launching satellites is like a multi-million-dollar endeavor. Most satellites, even what are considered small ones, are like the size of this kind of table. These cost tens of millions of dollars to build and launch. And these guys had developed a prototype, sent it up on a high altitude balloon to demonstrate that the communications hardware in it actually could talk to the ground. And you could build one of these things for like $10,000. And that's with 2 PhDs, like hand soldering it together, $10,000 all in. And there are so many space launches happening around the world that are looking for payload that they could practically put it on a SpaceX launch for almost free. So we were like, oh my God, like this is what we need to invest in. And if you did listen to that podcast episode that I did 6 years ago that Tara sent you all, I was like, it's just like 2020. I was like, by the end of the year, we're going to have global connectivity solved. And as it turned out, well, the pandemic happened, and so the launch schedules got a little longer. But by the end of 2021, they had 150 of these satellites up. They had global coverage. They had a latency of minutes for any point on the planet. And they could do low bandwidth communications. So, you know, IoT level device communications. And they were acquired by SpaceX at the end of 2021, the only acquisition SpaceX ever did.
Wow.
And so now a big part of the SpaceX Starlink service was from this company called Swarm Technologies that I had the privilege of being an early investor in and an advisor to.
Was that through Farmhand?
Through a venture firm called Social Capital.
Social Capital. Tara?
That is super cool. I did not know that.
It is super cool.
If they tell you straight up.
And maybe you could just give us, I mean, it seems kind of obvious, but what is it that is so important about connectivity in bringing these farms into modern technology?
Well, it's modern digial technology.
Modern
Because farms
digital.
use a lot of modern technology,
With
just
their
not all of it
tractors
is
and-
digital. Yeah. But, try to do anything digital and not have connectivity, what's the point? If you can't share data between devices and across distances, and connectivity is like foundational. Without connectivity, you're never gonna digitize anything well. You're never gonna digitize it well.
So you're seeing now the ability to use sensors, to use drones, like what, how are the,
I see so much Starlink uptake in rural communities and in on-farm technologies that we really are hitting a point where we can really start to put data behind the farming practices. I mean, real data. Let me also say, I don't want to give anybody the impression that farms aren't digital, because this is another place where agriculture is a highly fragmented industry. Because if you're growing corn and soy in the Midwest, those farmers are incredibly digitized and they're making very data-based decisions, because the John Deere tractor, right, the nature of the crops that they grow, you have this John Deere tractor that is driving over every centimeter of those fields. That tractor could drive autonomously 10 years ago. Waymo, be damned. Like, John Deere tractors can drive autonomously, so whether you're planting, seeding, harvesting, the farmer is sitting in a cab with 4 monitors in front of them. The tractor is driving, and the tractor is so accurate with GPS that when it gets to an end of a row and makes a turn, the overlaps between those lanes are so little that those farmers are using less chemicals, and they have better yield and more efficiency just because the tractors are so good, and there's so many sensors built in. And if you can run a 10,000 acre corn and soy farm with very few employees, right? One family on a 10,000 acre farm can farm that farm, and they're doing it with a lot of digital data. But if you're growing strawberries in Salinas, not so much, because you're moving every 13 months that crop and all of that irrigation infrastructure to a whole new field, because you have to keep rotating, because, you know, once strawberries come off a field, broccoli usually goes down because of the pest pressures. And it makes it hard to put digital infrastructure in place. So there's a lot less digitization. And the crops are so highly labor intensive to grow and especially to harvest that you're not collecting the kind of data about them that you are when there is machine harvesting.
so again, that, there are many
So
different
there-
ways that
yeah.
people are growing food, and depending on the area, depending on the food itself, the crop that they're doing. There's so many variables involved. It's very complex, I would think.
Right, there are 1,000 things that what the farmers care most about is their yield. At the end of the year, And as a business and how it's run, imagine if you had to run a business where you put up, at the beginning of the year, the land you own, that is your home, oftentimes, you have to put up all of the cost. And only at the end of the year do you find out if you've made enough money to cover those costs and actually make a profit so that you can feed yourselves and your family and have, pay your farm labor appropriately throughout the year. So as a business, like, incredibly hard to run, which is why the industry is so conservative. I don't want to make changes that might impact a recipe that was successful in years past.
But we've got,
This
like,
might, oh, I was gonna say, this might be a good opportunity for Nate's question, related to this. Nate, is that Nate in the program?
Yeah. What was my question?
let's see, you have a question.
Okay, well, so since you don't remember, you had two questions related to AI.
AI.
And whether or not, farming is an AI-proof industry.
I guess like asking about like how AI and like farmers, because like I know there's some problem with John Deere, like you said, that their technology is kept under their property so that farmers cannot work on their vehicles. So
Yeah, all
their
of that's changing.
fixes are impossible to do because they just can't get into the computer part of it. So how are you like making sure that AI doesn't like, I don't want to say like screw over farmers and make it like harder for them to like employ people and keep going?
Well, first of all, I think we start with, first we have to have digital data in farming, and then you can have big data and the kind of big data that you can start to train AI models on. And so on-farm operations, there's probably less that is going to happen with AI than what are still very interesting agriculture businesses, which are those first few steps in the supply chain, where those things are processed and the logistics that go behind it. There's a lot of room for AI there now. A lot of the farming jobs that happen on the farm, we're using people as machines, when we should be using machines as machines. So I think we have an opportunity, and there isn't enough farm labor for the number of jobs that need to be done. We've had a labor shortage in California for the last, 15 years. So where we can automate a lot of that work, and we need AI to do that, the AI that goes behind things like computer visioning, so that we're actually creating machines that are doing this really backbreaking, hard labor. And it gives us an opportunity to actually upskill the farm labor to be doing more interesting, less physically intensive jobs. And one of the things that California is doing, at least attempting to make a good job at investing in, is creating programs for the farm laborers at the community colleges, so that if, imagine that your job as a farm laborer is moving up and down the state with the changing of the seasons, because you're harvesting citrus in the winter in the Coachella Valley in Southern California, but you're harvesting wine grapes in the Napa Valley here in Northern California in the fall. And as you're moving across the state, you can go from community college to complete a degree program to learn about farm robotics and how to repair farm robotics and how to repair these really complicated computerized autonomous tractors. And so those programs are starting to go into place with the community colleges. So I welcome the day when we can have more AI on the farm, because I also think it makes the farm a more interesting place that attracts labor from other sectors of society back to the farm.
I had a question. Earlier you brought up the Netherlands and how they're efficient with their berry farming. And I was just going to ask if there was a country that is like the precipice, or are we that country that is like super far advanced, or is just the leading pioneer in ag tech and trying to specifically evolve in that demographic?
The Netherlands.
Mm-hmm.
I would also put Singapore on that list. Singapore had an initiative in 2020 that they called 30 by 30. So Singapore mostly urban. Like, they don't have any more farmland. They have almost no farmland inside of Singapore. And they recognize that it creates a situation for them of food insecurity, that they were importing something like 90% of their food. And so their goal by 2030 is to produce 30% of their own food. And they're having to do it through greenhouse and vertical farming. And it's one of the few places on the planet, there in Japan, where vertical farming is economically viable, but in large part because the government is willing to invest and subsidize things like the energy infrastructure, and that makes those vertical farming businesses profitable, because you take out that uneconomic part, which is the electricity. In Japan, after the tsunami, it was 2012, that tsunami took out about 100,000 acres of farmland, because suddenly you had saltwater intrusion on fertile farmland. So Japan lost 100,000 acres or more of farmland that was food producing. So the Japanese government invested several $billions into vertical farming as a hedge on their future food security, because they lost arable farmland. And the largest vertical farm on the planet, by the way. It's a company, operates 3 vertical farms that are producing tons of leafy greens on a daily basis, and in an almost wholly automated fashion.
Are there opportunities with innovation to help with the energy efficiency, like solar panels? Is there, I mean, this sounds like obviously they've thought of this.
I would say most of the indoor farms, not just the vertical farms, but the high-tech glass houses like in the Netherlands, they're often co-located with renewable energy projects. So they get the heat of something that's renewable energy and can convert that into electricity. So yeah, there's a lot of co-location of that, and that's a lot of what's happening in Japan too, is co-location of food production to take the ambient heat and the free electricity from other energy projects.
Can you name some of those energy projects? Is that like, are they using compost and the heat coming off of that?
They're usually large solar, like utility scale solar arrays, or natural gas plants, and you can off-take heat and they output electricity that you can pump into the farm. But energy sector, not my sector.
But there's overlap,
Tons
obviously.
of innovations. Yes, lots of overlap, as people are learning with the Iran war. When oil doesn't move, food prices go up. Food is the most susceptible to changes in energy prices.
I was just going to ask exactly about that. I was really curious about your thoughts, because I came in a little late, but I have a very complicated question that's going to take me like a little bit to articulate, because it's kind of hard to wrap my head around. I guess kind of like the ongoing Iran war demonstrated how like slight upward shifts in just like oil prices correlate to everything across the board and the economy going up, but agriculture, because everybody needs to eat, is like kind of the most important thing. And I'm guessing more in regards to like economics, if we're projected to go up to 11 million people, can you envision like a future where I guess we're not as dependable on like hydrocarbon energy for like both on the grid and on the field? I guess like the thing that's special about oil is just the energy density in comparison to like other energy sources, like what we have in like a cubic centimeter matches roughly to like 8 times the volume matched in like lithium iron or whatever else. And obviously you're probably not going to use nuclear to power a tractor. So it's kind of like a chemistry problem that you can't, it's very hard to replace hydrocarbons, and there's going to be a lot of demand for us to keep producing food constantly without failure. That's kind of like what I mean, if that makes sense.
So comment on that. You are right that the food and ag is the sector that is most susceptible to rises in energy prices. And that's because agriculture is dependent on fossil fuels in 4 really important ways. The first is the production of the chemistry. the fertilizers, the insecticides, the herbicides. Even if you're making insecticides and herbicides and fertilizers that are otherwise neutral to the environment, you still use the Haber-Bosch process to produce them, and that's the starter there is natural gas. So to manufacture the chemistry and ferment the biologicals that you need as inputs on those crops is the most significant way that we're dependent on fossil fuels in food production. The second is the use of diesel, because almost all farm machinery runs on diesel. Just those two alone. But what I look at that and say, well, but that's an innovator's problem. Like if you're thinking like an innovator, you look at that and say, well, that's an opportunity. Are there ways that we can create nitrogen fertilizers and not use the Haber-Bosch process? Like Haber-Bosch was a massive innovation that changed the world. Where's that next innovation that takes it out of the equation, right? There's a place where we could be innovating.
Do you think there's anything in the horizon, like specifically in regards to Haber-Bosch for producing money?
There are definitely several research projects that I'm aware of that are looking at, can you use electricity in a way that doesn't use natural gas that can start that process of creating either nitrogen or potassium. So yes.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mario. Kaden, do you want to ask your question, in particular the one about VC? I will ask for you, Kaden. What were the best and worst? Oh, there you are.
Go ahead. I can barely hear you. The voice isolation is a bit difficult.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No worries.
You want to ask your question?
Yeah. Which one? I have two. Which one was it about?
The best and worst.
Oh, yeah. Maybe walk us through, some of the best and worst parts about being a venture capitalist in general, right? I mean, I feel like I've interacted with quite a few of them, especially being maybe on the founder side. Walk us through maybe some of the best experiences, some of the worst experiences, maybe everything in between. Would you recommend it? Just kind of that.
Would I recommend it? I love it. So yeah, I would recommend it, but you really have to be a special kind of person. Let me start with what I hate the most about venture capitalists, because it plays into that stereotype. Yeah, I hate other venture capitalists. I also work in a sector that is ag tech, so the venture capital is a little less what you see in the headlines, dealing with billionaire tech bros, some of whom I've met and Tara and I have had the pleasure of working with. So what I hate most is working with those types of venture capitalists. What I like the best about it is that I get to be on the side where I can find an entrepreneur that I really believe in, and I have conviction about the problem and the business that they are trying to build. And across a portfolio at any given time of, depending on the size of the venture firm I work for, we're looking for a portfolio of about 15 companies. Like, it's so exciting to be able to work across those companies and help them and see the measurable progress that they make in growing their business. But it takes somebody who has a lot of experience, and I would also say failures in building those businesses, to be able to find those right businesses and help them grow. But that's what I love the most about it. Being on the founder and raising money from venture capitalists, my worst horror story. I was working at the time for an e-commerce company, and our thesis was that women, everybody's built these e-commerce companies that appeal to men, but women as a demographic are actually the CFO of a lot of the households. And so female commerce is where it's at. And when we went up and down Sand Hill Road in Silicon Valley trying to raise money for a women's e-commerce company, we were almost always, me and the CEO, I was the chief product officer, we were the only two women in the room. We would be sitting at a conference table of 12 guys, and we're trying to pitch a women's e-commerce company. And the amount of misogyny and assumption that they brought into the room with them was so disgusting. So we changed our pitch to start with, how many of you actually bought the shirt you're wearing? Or was it your wife? And then suddenly they were like, oh, yes, women's e-commerce, tell us more. And then we were able to raise $8 million from Kleiner Perkins in Series A.
Wonderful, congratulations.
Thank you.
Paola and I were in the Netherlands last summer.
Oh,
And we were talking to, do you remember the CEO from Blue Kelp? And do you remember her story? She talked about how she didn't pitch, right?
Yeah, she doesn't want any venture capital money because she bootstrapped it, I believe, because she didn't even want to deal with these guys. There's like she dealt with a lot of misogyny as well.
She also had her brother-in-law, when there was a need for pitching, and particularly to a bunch of other men, she would bring her brother-in-law. She could lay down the context, but it was her brother-in-law that had to come in and actually seal
I've
the
heard
deal.
that story from more than one female entrepreneur. It's why we need more women in venture capital and more women starting companies.
Yeah.
Are there any companies that you've invested in, if any, that it was like an amazing idea, but it was just too early?
God, I feel like there was a lot of that. We kind of suffered from that at Netscape, Tara and I. We were always on the bleeding edge of the company making new products, and then they were always just a step ahead of where the market was. That I actually invested in? No.
Or seen?
I've seen, yes. I was an advisor for a while to a company called Z-Tractor, which was trying to be Tesla of farm machinery. Electric and autonomous. And the company was started, probably about 2015, 2016. And I would say right product, but not yet quite the right time. One, because the AI technologies weren't good enough to really get a small foreign tractor to be really autonomous. And two, because the electrical infrastructure on the farm just isn't there to do the charging. And three, the batteries. We still need some innovation on the battery side, because one of the problems with electrical equipment on the farm, even if you have the charging infrastructure, is that it's often having to pull very heavy equipment. And so the amount of torque that you need just eats through battery life like so fast. So we're not quite there. But companies like the John Deeres and the Case New Hollands, which are the behemoths in the space, are not going to get us there. There's definitely room for innovation there.
Why? 1 second. Why isn't John Deere innovating?
John Deere is the classic innovator's dilemma. The company is very big, very bureaucratic, and very slow. In fact, I just this morning was on a call with a company that is pitching my firm for investment. And the two founders had spent 10 years at John Deere. And the reason they're leaving is because they'd worked on this technology for 8 years at John Deere, and it was going nowhere because of the bureaucratic layers. And when you're John Deere, you have an entrenched business model that you have to protect because you have to protect your shareholder value. And that business model is predicated on supporting your network of dealers and the financing of very large equipment that costs, in excess of $500,000. Some of it more than $1 million. And they're very invested in that equipment, and it's very invested on a combustion engine. So to ask them to innovate on something so far out of their area of expertise, like electricity, and to do it quickly, it's not going to happen. They're a classic innovator's dilemma.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to ask about, you said one of your main goals going into the ag tech field is sustainability. And I really wonder what it takes to get that onto the field, in the sense that I feel like generally most the agricultural environment wants short-term gain in a sense of like, I mean, we're farming an abundance of corn in order to like make economic gain at the cost of a lot. So what I guess, is there any way, are there any inventions or is there any way to like kind of put sustainability as a profitable model in the agricultural field?
That's a great question and a huge question.
Well, I think we could try to break it down. So there's sustainability for the environment, there's sustainability for the farm workers, there's sustainability for the business model. So
I think all three live together in the same.
I agree with that. One of the reasons why we grow so much corn is because we have government subsidies that support it. And at the time that we put those government subsidies into place, it was the right thing to do. The problem we were trying to solve in the late 60s and early 70s was, well, pardon my French, holy fuck, we're gonna be 7 billion people by the end of the century, we can't produce enough kilocalories to feed them, so we need to subsidize these high kilocalorie grain crops, these commodity grains, so that we can produce enough calories to feed people. The problem is we've never gone back and have been able to revisit the way we subsidize that agriculture to subsidize it differently, and maybe we wouldn't be subsidizing corn and soy at such scale. So certainly public policy has a big role to play there because that also creates the economic incentives. And when you're talking about the adoption of sustainable practices on the farm, most farmers are doing the best they can with the tools that are available to them to be sustainable, because a lot of them, remember, are stewarding land that has been in their families. Some of them, I've met 7th generation farmers. So they care deeply about the land and being able to pass it on to their children and their grandchildren and making sure it's sustainable, and they don't want to be, bathing in chemicals either. But it's also not fair in the way that that value chain works, that we as consumers want our food to be produced in a way that's sustainable for the environment, sustainable for the labor that are working those farms, sustainable for the farmers themselves, but all of the costs get passed down that supply chain to the farmer, and they have no one to pass it on to. So it's also not fair that we're asking farms and farmers to take on all of that cost. Because at the end of the day, if I'm gonna pay a little bit more money to apply a little bit more pesticide because I care that I need the yield in order to make my revenue event.
So in essence, most of it has to do with public policy and the way that we frame, or the government frames, kind of takes on more of the cost so that the consumer and the farmer take less of the cost.
A lot of it is public policy and creating the right incentives for other parts of that supply chain to have to bear some of that cost. I think it's consumers demanding more sustainable food, or food that, let's set the GMO question aside, but with certified labels like certified humane or certified organic. It's great that consumers demand that stuff because large food companies hear that and then start demanding it of their growers. I think one of the best case studies in this was Danone, the company that makes Dannon yogurt, among other dairy products. It's one of the largest food companies on the planet. And they looked at their supply chain and realized they couldn't trace the source of what farm produces the milk that's in the yogurt you're eating because they had way too many suppliers. And they wanted to be able to have more control over sustainable sourcing and some of the farm practices that go into a quality product that consumers are demanding. And so they consolidated into the handful of farms that were using those sustainable practices and consolidated their supply chain. But the only reason they did that is because consumers were demanding it.
Yeah.
And those farmers ended up making more money because they had a guaranteed buyer who was willing to pay a premium for it because their customers were.
Yeah. Do you mind? I have another kind of long question, but I guess it's a bit of a switch up. But in this one, I guess, part of the field that I have a massive problem with is the food shipping industry, and how we have a duopoly in the U.S. of just like, and like just the lack of localization of crops, as you talked about how in the Netherlands we ship from Australia to the Netherlands, and so we're not. I mean, I think here in Santa Cruz, a lot of people go to the farmers market. We have a lot of fertile land near us, but I don't know. Is there any innovation in like the near future on the ways that we distribute produce, so that I guess we're not sending our grapes or whatever like just all over the place? And
Well, I would question some of your assumptions there, because why, if let's take almonds for example, because that's one that most people, and has gotten a lot of press. California grows 80% of the world's almonds. The other 20% come from places like North Africa and Iran. So we supply 100% of North America's almonds, 80% of Europe's almonds, almost 100% of Asia's almonds. But also the Central Valley is one of the best growing environments in the world for almonds. So the whole world should be able to eat almonds. They're nutritious, they're healthy, there are lots of reasons. And the transport of things, especially by ship, the transportation cost is so small and so little carbon footprint. It is not where you are gonna get, if you want sustainability, you need actually a hub and spoke model of distribution, because that's a lot more efficient and you can grow at the kind of scale that you need. So you should be growing those commodities in the places that are best suited for them. Therefore, you're going to have to transport them around the world. And that's actually better, and I would argue more sustainable in the long run.
I wanted, like, it's kind of also like a big question as well. Like, I was thinking through what could be solved, I guess, because every time you try to fix a problem, you create a new one. Like when you create, like the greenhouse thing, like I was thinking maybe you can grow it underground, geothermal, you could take that. But then you would produce like carbon dioxide another way, like you would produce chemicals another way, harnessing that, like getting down every time, like you disturb everything. And so my thought is, why are we working so hard to move away from the natural when the natural seems to be like what can sustain us, at least part of it. I think that we should really move back towards communal gardens at least, or like having families grow. Like my family, we grow in our backyard, what little space we have. Like we grow our own lettuce, we grow cucumber, we grow beans. But other things that need to be specialized, like I can definitely see why almonds would be grown in a certain zone. I can see why like avocados would be. I can understand that. But I do think that that's more so a case of like specialization in products. Like we can do that in a more sustainable way. We're not doing it with everything.
Because I think the answer, it's not an either or. I think it's a yes and. Like you should be shopping at your local farmer's market, and you should be supporting your local farmers, because we're also blessed to live in an area where we have such great weather. We have year-round growing seasons in California, but we're one of the only places on the planet that has that year-round growing season. And I think what ends up happening, in order to feed everybody sustainably, you have small farms and you have very large farms, and what you don't have are medium-sized farms. And this is where you see a lot of stories about farm consolidation. It's the medium-sized farms that either become smaller and more local, or consolidate and become very large farms, because you need both in the food system. Because some things like almonds, like soybeans, like rice, you have to have the efficiency that comes from a large-scale operation, right? We cultivate wheat in Ukraine on farms that are like 100,000 acres in size. I mean, I can't even visualize what 100,000 acres looks like. But if you want to produce enough wheat that you can make bread and cereal and all these other things that wheat is in, you have to have farm sizes of 100,000 acres that specialize in the parts of the world where it's the right climate and the right soil. So it's yes and, you need both, and not everybody is privileged enough to be able to grow food in their backyard.
Just to frame this question, I'll get to the farming part, but to start, basically how it would cost big pharmaceutical companies a lot of money if people were being cured of diseases rather than kind of being repeat customers. Have you seen maybe bias toward, like let's say Kellogg's, who's so beneficially impacted by corn farmers having incentives or something like that? Have you seen maybe corruption in that to where maybe they don't want us to be farming in our own backyards and stuff like that?
Well, I think one of the things that I learned about the food system is, and just companies in general, is that most of them are not actually trying to be malicious. You may have malicious actors inside those companies, right? Like even a company like Enron, which was a famously malicious company. It was a handful of actors. Most of the employees were like, what? So corruption, no. But I think what you have are food companies that, like Kellogg's and General Mills, that were created in the late 19th century. The world was a different place. They have been able to create economies of scale with a certain business model in the way that they process certain agricultural inputs into products they call food. And maybe when I was born in the 1970s, Cocoa Puffs and Wheaties were considered healthy, but we know that's not the case now. But their business models are very entrenched in that way of working. And they're going to defend that business model. But that means if that's not where consumer sentiment is for the kind of food that consumers really want, and Kellogg's trying to, the best example was talking to somebody literally at Frito-Lay who was like, we're trying to formulate healthier foods. And I was like, well, give me an example. And they were like, lime-flavored Doritos. Like, they're clearly so entrenched in that business model. But that means, as an innovator, I look at that and I'm like, well, there's room for disruption. Like, you're getting out of touch with what the consumer really wants. There's an opportunity to innovate and create a product that the consumer does. And I think you've seen a ton of innovation on the consumer food side in the last 10 years, like food and beverage as a subsector of what we've been talking about is the whole ag value chain. The food and beverage subsector has seen some of the largest mergers and acquisitions happening in the last 10 to 15 years because innovators were out there going, hey, more people want to eat vegetarian, so I'm going to create a brand called Amy's, and I'm just going to make healthy, good vegetarian meals that people can buy in the freezer section and microwave. And then Amy's got bought by General Mills because they found a product that people wanted that General Mills was never going to figure out how to formulate themselves. So, opportunity for innovation.
Thank you.
So we talk about corporate entrepreneurship. It seems like there's a lot of need for corporate entrepreneurship. Can we even have that type of intrapreneurship, we call it?
I don't know. The first word that came to my head with corporate entrepreneurship was oxymoron. Yes and no. I mean, look, to say corporations are this one faceless kind of entity, some corporations are much better at innovation than others. So there are certainly corporate environments where that innovation can happen. Or where, like in the case of this company I talked to this morning, it wasn't happening for them at John Deere, but they have a ton of operational experience in the farm machinery space that they've decided to set out on their own. And that to me is a form of corporate entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have been able to start the company they're starting if they didn't have the years of experience that they are bringing from John Deere.
Well, it's interesting, we had Brian Grant last Wednesday, and we were talking about, the creation of IP that the corporation's not interested in commercializing, right? So it sounds like a similar situation.
Yes.
You talked about small farms, medium-sized farms, and large farms. I've been a consumer of community-sponsored agriculture for 30 years. We have a farm here, Live Earth Farm. We got with them when they first started. Live Earth Farm. Do y'all know what community-sponsored agriculture is? It's a type of farming business model that started in Japan, I think it was like 50 years ago, pretty far. And what had happened was there was a food scarcity in some suburbs in Tokyo, where these families had to drive very far to get fresh food. And they had farms all around them. And they're like, wait a second, why don't we just pay the farmers to produce the food and we'll buy it from them? And so it's a subscription-based model where you have a subscription with the farmer, and the farmer harvests whatever is ready to be harvested and puts it in a box, and once a week you get that box, and you cook with whatever's in that box. You get the food that there's a lot of theory around that it's actually more beneficial for your body to eat the food that is that is harvesting at the time of your location, that it's better than to be eating grapes in January that are coming from Chile, right? You've probably heard of this. Have you heard about this idea that you should be eating those things that are around you and harvested? Yeah, it makes sense. So we have several community-sponsored agriculture here in Santa Cruz. What do you know about that? And is there a potential for it to scale in some way to bring in the medium-sized farms?
No.
There's
That's why some of the medium-sized farms decide to become smaller farms and focus on a CSA business model, because you're a farm serving your local community. But that has a very important part to play in the overall food system, because for any geography on the planet, you need those small farms in that local community, and you need the efficiency that's happening everywhere else in the globe. And the answer to your food options in your geography are both.
It makes sense. Because they're not giving me wheat.
Correct.
Or rice.
Or rice. Or canola.
Right.
Surprisingly important. Yes.
Yeah, the corn
Or any of those tropical fruits that you probably like papayas and mangoes.
avocados.
What would you say about like people, like companies switching from like the crop that they have to a cheaper crop that's cheaper for them to like for their expenses, so they can increase their profit? Because like with like the farms that start small and then become big, they need to keep making money for their shareholders and for themselves.
Those farms don't have shareholders. Those farms are owned by families. Even if they have a corporate structure behind the business, they're owned by, you know, a small number of family members. Most of the 99% of farms are family owned. What was your question?
Well, like with companies taking like a plant that they're already producing and then making it cheaper, like something else that's cheaper for them to produce or lesser of quality, so that way they keep their profit lines.
You're thinking of a farm like it's a factory, and it's not that easy to retool a farm to even change crops.
Not just to change, but like to like O'Driscoll's has the power to. They have more money and more resources than other farms that make strawberries and berries, right? So.
Except they're not the farmer. Driscoll's is actually, they are the geneticists who breed the plants that those seedlings of which they give to the farmers with a guaranteed contract that at the farm gate at harvest they will buy them. So somebody who's a strawberry farmer or a raspberry, blackberry farmer, that's all they do, right? And they know that crop, and they're growing that crop in an area where the environment and the soil are amenable to growing that crop. So if you're a farmer in Nevada, you're not growing raspberries and blackberries and strawberries. You have to be a farmer here in the Salinas Valley or down in Oxnard or in certain parts of Mexico, or because of similar climate, certain parts of now Peru and Chile. So that's where berry farmers universally are, in a few parts in the, in Europe, a similar climate. So you're already restricted by what you can grow and how you can grow it. And you're not, there is no way to get like a cheaper crop.
Well, not just crop, but like maybe like cheaper use of pesticides or insecticides or stuff that, because like obviously if you keep making X amount over time, you're gonna want to make more money.
Yeah. This is where farming businesses are really hard businesses, because you're not in control of your revenue line except in the amount of yield that you can produce. And the way that you produce more yield is by more better stewardship over those plants, which often may mean a little more fertilizer to increase yield, a little more even prophylactic, herbicide, pesticide, fungicide, because I want to make sure I protect all of that yield. It's not as easy to manage the P&L because you don't control the revenue line as much, and the amount of cost structure that you have to control is also quite limited, at least in impacting those costs.
Nicole?
I'm really interested in agriculture as well. I did like a trip in Dublin a couple weeks ago for like a school thing, and I spoke to farmers there about like the dairy industry and things of that nature. And for him, he liked solar. He was able to put energy back into the grid from when he was producing in excess. However, I've heard that solar does take up a lot of land. It can be very because it's so dark and it creates a lot of heat. It can also it's just placed sitting on the grass, basically burning it. What are people using? What are they thinking about using it? Is there anything I've never heard of yet?
There's a ton of renewable energy production happening on farmland. In California, that often looks like solar, and you're right, it takes acreage out of production. But for a lot of the almost every farm I've been on in California have solar panels. They may take, somewhere between 1 and 5 acres out of production, but then they're in control of their own energy future. And in California specifically, something like 90% of the farmland are customers of PG&E. And when PG&E when there are rolling brownouts, in the summer when it's really hot and they're going to turn off some parts of the grid, it's the agriculture land in the rural communities that get turned off before they turn off cities like Santa Cruz or San Jose or San Francisco. So a lot of farmers have installed solar on their farms so that they are not subjected to PG&E, what they feel are PG&E's, decisions. And in the Midwest, that looks a lot like wind, as much as those are Trump voters and Trump seems to be allergic to windmills. A lot of Midwestern farms have wind generation on their farms. One, because it does give them some electricity, or they can sell it to the grid, and that's another revenue stream for the farm. An interesting area of innovation where over the last 10 years the Department of Energy has put a lot of money into starting to research is an area called agrivoltaics. So how do you create the right products and architectures for solar panels to coexist with food production, whether that's shading for animals and partial shading for crops, because in a world of climate change, there are active genetic programs going on to try and change the colors of things like berries and tomatoes and fruits and vegetables so that they're more sun resilient. So where you can have agrivoltaic structures that provide partial shading through some of the day, and you have energy production, and now you're starting to stack, a square acre of land can be producing energy and producing food.
I think it's a good reminder that agriculture doesn't just mean plants, right? So solar panels plus grazing land is increasingly a huge deal in many areas. Ironically, Texas is one of the biggest areas, which amuses the hell out of me. But yeah, I think it's really interesting to see the innovation in how we combine different ideas in order to create systems. that are mutually beneficial.
Yep, absolutely.
Are investors in your space paying attention to the nutritional decline of crops, or do they only focus on how much they produce?
That's a tough one. And so it's an apt observation that the nutritional density of food in some crops, not all, has declined. In some crops, it's actually increased.
Which crops?
Tomatoes,
Tomatoes have increased or decreased?
increased.
Increased.
Yeah.
And which crops have decreased? Wheat or?
Off the top of my head, I would say probably a handful of your most common vegetable crops may have, there's not great scientific study on it, and at a systems level to quantify it, but so you've got these massive breeding programs that go on at different plant companies and seed companies because they're trying to change through natural breeding processes. We don't even have to get into GMOs, but through natural selective breeding, you're trying to improve the quality of the plants that you're growing year after year. And a lot of those breeding programs are focused on how do you breed in pest resistance. So right now in citrus, for example, Florida just lost almost all of its citrus industry because of a bacterial infection called citrus greening, or HLB. And so there are citrus breeders that are actively trying to figure out how do we create orange trees that are immune to this bacteria. And so that's a lot of the focus of breeding programs for outdoor agriculture is how do you keep up with all the various pests and the different races of those pests. And so there's not as much emphasis on the outcomes that we would also want to see as consumers, like the taste, the texture, the flavor profile, which is why I say your nutrition density and flavor of your average tomato has vastly increased in the grocery store in the last 20 to 30 years, because more and more of them are grown in a greenhouse where there's less pressure on those breeding programs to have to breed just for pest resistance. They can start to focus and put into the genome those traits that we care about, like color, size, shape, nutrient density, flavor. So we've had an explosion of all the different types of tomatoes and colors and sizes and flavor profiles of tomatoes.
We have just 10 more minutes, less than 10 more minutes, and I have 2 questions that I hope we can, and unless Tara has some more. Claire Thomas asks, as Silicon Valley invests more in the food system, how can we ensure these technologies remain accessible and beneficial to farmers globally rather than increasing inequality?
We need less Silicon Valley money in food and agriculture.
Why is that?
Why is that? Because where we have had investment from Silicon Valley, they don't understand the nuances and the complexities of agriculture as an industry and all of that differentiation from crop types and geographies. And there's a lot of nuance in the industry. And most tech investors don't understand it. And most tech investors also don't have the patience or the fund structures for how long it takes to build great businesses in agriculture. Because when you can't just go out and iterate every few weeks in an agile way on a product that you're developing if a farmer has to use it, because you get one growing season a year. So you have one shot at an iteration. So it takes longer to develop those products and really have a bulletproof product that a farmer can risk their farm using. So most tech investors, when you could alternatively be investing in AI companies that can build and reach maturity in, OpenAI has gone to what, multi-billion-dollar valuation in like a 3-year period. Tech investors should be investing in that and not. So there are specialty investors like the firm I work for that specialize in investing in this stuff.
How many other ag VCs are you seeing, ag-centric VCs?
Oh, there's a whole class of ag-centric capital, and not just venture capital, because venture capital is a very specific financial instrument that is about underwriting high technology risk. And there, a lot of great agriculture companies are built by having a blended finance model of non-dilutive capital, whether that's grant money or philanthropic money, and different debt instruments that aren't just venture capital, which is an equity instrument.
Tara?
If anybody in here is a finance nerd.
I thought, because we're almost done, I thought Ava had a good question. Was Ava in class today?
Yeah.
Remember your
You want to
question?
ask it? Which question was it?
It was, how can students or young people get involved in building sustainable food systems without an agricultural background?
Well, yeah, that was the question. You want to repeat it?
No, I guess you just.
No, well, if you are interested in trying to build companies or innovations in this space, then I would say the best thing that you can do, no matter what space you want to build an innovation for, is go out and learn about that space, spend time with the people in it and ask the right questions, and just objectively, try and empathize with their answers, no judgments, because you'll get to the heart of what are the problems that they're having, and observing those problems in the context of where they're happening, or where the best sparks come for the ideas of these are the innovations that can solve them. So go talk to farmers. They're just down the street in Salinas.
Is Natalia here? Do you want to ask your question about skills?
Yeah. My question was, skill? Oh, okay. My question was, what skills do you recommend students should start building out if they want to work in startups or in venture capital in the future?
I would start, my best advice is start by working in a large company, because all startups aspire to be that large company. And if you don't know what success looks like, you're not going to be very useful in a startup. So go get some big company experience first, then go and find all the things that are frustrating and lacking innovation there, and then go join a startup to do that. But for me, it was much more, I think it was helpful in the early part of my career that I did work in some big corporates, because I got to learn how things can be done and what they look like at scale. And venture capital, I don't want to work in venture capital. Venture capital is, unless you are a finance nerd, which maybe you are, and that's fine. Unless you're a finance nerd, that's where the entry-level jobs in venture capital are, is doing spreadsheet analysis and valuations, and spending a lot of time in a spreadsheet and doing market research. But those jobs aren't partner-level jobs at the firm. So you can start in venture capital through finance as your superpower, but then you're going to have to go off and get some other experience, either corporate experience or startup experience. Because most of the venture capital partner roles are people that were experienced operators. At the firm that I'm at, Radical Growth, the managing director of the firm worked at Cisco back in the day, but learned how to do sales, and then was a 3-time startup founder. And the other partner was the chief technology officer at a very large agricultural company, a very large ag corporate called Corteva. So a lot of operational experience.
Thank you.
You have a question?
I just have like a question. So in terms of, I understand why we want to commoditize seeds, so we want to have ownership over seed, but it does feel like a little bit predatory in the sense that you are not allowed whatsoever to plant seeds that you don't have permission or that you have not bought, and that you could be prosecuted if somebody who is your neighbor who is using a seed that you have not bought, suddenly the wind brings difference.
Yeah.
So, but how do you prevent that from happening with the mass implementation of like machinery or different changes? Like, how can we really make sure that we're looking out for is there laws, like, does it have to be laws, like, in terms of proper implementation, like, how do we make sure it doesn't happen?
But you're talking about the
Debt,
seed,
yeah.
the seed
Like,
part?
farmers are in debt for these machines, that they don't have to pay
Oh,
for these
yeah.
machines, things like that, because they're in debt for the seeds, making back money every year. Like, they can't, sometimes they
Yeah.
can't feed them, and so, yeah, that just creates very something.
Well, the farm debt is a really complicated question because it's mostly not tied back to the seeds they buy. It may be tied back to some of the large equipment that they have to finance, but it's also tied back to the fact that the revenue event happens once a year, and that revenue event isn't always in excess of the cost that they had to put into growing the crop that year. So farm debt is a really complicated issue, but on the seed part, there's a lot of money and R&D that goes into developing those genetics that go into the seeds and the plants that the farmers plant. So those companies have the right to protect their IP because they've spent literally millions of dollars on their plant breeding programs just to come up with one varietal. And it takes somewhere between 3 to 7 years, depending on the crop, to bring a new varietal to market. So they should have the right to protect their IP. That said, Monsanto has probably the best legal team on the planet, and they put, in my personal opinion, put the cart before the horse and let the tail wag the dog because they were very aggressive in their enforcement of the IP, sometimes at the individual farm level. So that may not be right either. But the companies that are developing those genetics, and there's a lot of innovation going on the genetic side. There are a ton of startup companies that are trying to do new plant genetics and bring new varietals to market in different ways. And so we want that innovation to be happening, and those companies do deserve to protect their IP through a patent because of the costs that go into it.
Yeah, because I can see you wouldn't want to create something beyond the tech rate, so it's always like the same thing there. Yeah, I hope that that's like a consideration always.
And those companies also, there are companies that create seed varietals. Often a lot of the seed varietals that you're buying for like your backyard fruits and vegetables, where they license some of the IP and then create their own crosses that they can sell the seeds of. So IP can be licensed.
All right, well, I think we're done. Tara, do you have anything else?
No, but I did want to ask, I think we forgot to talk about this. You get to pick your favorite question, and the question asker gets a prize, which I have to come back to Santa Cruz to give, but I am keeping track. So did you have a favorite question tonight, Micki?
There were lots of favorite questions. I have to pick one. What's your name?
Nicole.
I liked Nicole's question about the small and the large farm sizes. Being able to grow fruits and vegetables in your backyard, and why can't we, do that at a greater scale? I think I thought that was an insightful question, and one that really illustrates why I think the food system is bifurcated into small farms and very large farms, and maybe shouldn't have those medium-sized farms.
All right, I have noted this. So Isabel from last week and Nicole from this week, your swag is coming.
Yay! Right